In the months following the trial, Marcus Johnson's life began to take on a new rhythm. The media frenzy eventually died down, but the impact of his story lingered in ways he hadn't anticipated. Strangers reached out to him via social media, sharing their own experiences with injustice and thanking him for inspiring them to speak up. Some were teenagers like him, while others were adults who had long buried their pain. Each message reinforced what Marcus already knew. This fight wasn't just about one person. It was about all the voices that had been silenced. Determined to channel his experience into something positive, Marcus became an advocate for change. He started attending community meetings, speaking alongside activists and legal experts about police reform and racial equity. His speeches weren't polished or rehearsed. They came straight from the heart, filled with raw honesty and vulnerability. "I didn't ask for this," he often said, "but if my story can help even one person feel less alone, then it's worth it." His words resonated deeply, earning him invitations to larger events, including youth summits and town halls. Back at school, Marcus found himself stepping into a leadership role. Friends who had once teased him for being quiet now looked to him as someone brave enough to stand up for what was right. Together, they formed a student group dedicated to promoting equality and fairness within their community. They organized fundraisers, hosted guest speakers, and created art projects highlighting stories of resilience. For Marcus, seeing his peers step up gave him hope, not just for the future, but for the present. Meanwhile, Danielle Carter continued her work fighting against systemic racism in law enforcement. Inspired by Marcus' courage, she launched a nonprofit aimed at providing free legal aid to victims of police misconduct. She stayed in touch with Marcus, offering guidance whenever he needed it, and marveled at how much he had grown since their first meeting. "You're going to change the world," she told him during one of their calls. Marcus laughed softly, replying, "Maybe. But I'm starting small, one conversation at a time." For Officer Patricia Hargrove, life after the trial was starkly different. Stripped of her badge and facing prison time, she retreated from public view, her name forever tied to shame. Former colleagues avoided mentioning her, and the department implemented mandatory bias training for all officers, a policy change sparked directly by her case. While some saw her punishment as harsh, many agreed it served as a necessary reminder. Authority without accountability is dangerous. As spring approached, Marcus decided to mark the anniversary of his arrest by hosting a candlelight vigil in the park where protests had once erupted. Hundreds of people showed up, holding candles and singing songs of unity. Marcus stood at the center, addressing the crowd with gratitude and grace. "This year taught me that justice isn't perfect," he said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "But it also taught me that we have the power to make things better, to demand fairness, to listen, and to grow together." The night ended with laughter and tears, hugs exchanged between strangers turned allies, and promises to keep pushing forward. As Marcus walked home under a sky dotted with stars, he felt a quiet sense of peace. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would still be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But he knew he wasn't walking it alone. Marcus' story became more than just a headline or courtroom drama. It became a symbol of resilience, proof that even in the face of overwhelming odds, courage could spark meaningful change. And though scars remained, they reminded him not of pain but of strength, the kind that comes from standing firm when everything seems stacked against you. For Marcus Johnson, this wasn't the end of his journey. It was only the beginning. The courtroom was silent as the jury returned, their faces unreadable. Every eye in the room followed them as they took their seats, clutching slips of paper that held Marcus Johnson's fate and Officer Patricia Hargrove's future. The judge instructed the foreman to deliver the verdict, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. On the charge of racial profiling, the foreman began, his voice steady. "We find the defendant, Officer Patricia Hargrove, guilty." Gasps erupted from the crowd, quickly silenced by the judge's sharp glance. The foreman continued down the list: unlawful arrest, abuse of power, falsifying reports, all guilty. With each word, Hargrove visibly deflated, her shoulders slumping under the weight of judgment. For Marcus and his family, relief washed over them like a tidal wave. Tears streamed down Lisa's face as she hugged her son tightly, whispering, "We did it." The judge wasted no time delivering her sentence. Her voice carried a tone of disappointment and anger as she addressed Hargrove directly. "You swore an oath to uphold justice and serve your community without prejudice," she said sternly. "Instead, you betrayed that trust with actions rooted in bias and cruelty. Your behavior has not only harmed Marcus Johnson, but also damaged the integrity of law enforcement as a whole." She sentenced Hargrove to 2 years in prison, stripped her of her badge, and ordered her to pay restitution to Marcus' family for emotional distress. It was a rare outcome in cases like this, one that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. As officers escorted Hargrove out, her head bowed low, murmurs spread among spectators. Some clapped softly, while others simply sat in stunned silence. Outside, news crews scrambled to capture reactions from protesters who had gathered once again. Cheers erupted when someone shouted, "Justice served." Signs reading, "No more badges for bigots," waved proudly in the air. Social media exploded with hashtags celebrating the verdict, and pundits hailed it as a landmark moment in the fight against systemic racism. But amidst the celebrations, Marcus felt conflicted. While he was grateful for the outcome, he couldn't ignore the heaviness of what had happened. This victory hadn't come easily. It had cost him sleepless nights, public scrutiny, and countless hours reliving a traumatic experience. As reporters thrust microphones toward him outside the courthouse, he paused, searching for the right words. "This isn't just about me," he finally said, his voice calm but resolute. "It's about making sure no one else has to go through what I did. Real change doesn't happen overnight, but today is a step forward." Back inside the courtroom, Danielle Carter reflected on the case's significance. Winning wasn't just about proving Hargrove's guilt. It was about exposing deeper issues within the system. "This verdict sends a message," she told journalists later. "Accountability matters. Trust can only be rebuilt if we hold people responsible for their actions, regardless of their position." Meanwhile, the fallout extended far beyond the courthouse walls. Hargrove's arrest sparked intense debates within police departments nationwide. Some officers expressed concern about how easily bias could creep into everyday interactions, vowing to undergo additional training. Others doubled down, claiming the verdict set a dangerous precedent. Either way, conversations about reform gained momentum, fueled by renewed calls for transparency and accountability. For Marcus, life slowly began returning to normal, or at least as close to normal as possible after such an ordeal. Friends welcomed him back warmly, teachers praised his resilience, and strangers approached him to share stories of their own struggles with injustice. Though scars remained, Marcus found solace in knowing his courage had inspired others to speak up. He started journaling about his experiences, hoping someday to turn them into something meaningful, a book, maybe, or speeches for rallies advocating for change. The trial may have ended, but its impact rippled outward, touching lives far beyond the small suburban town where it all began. Justice had been served, yes, but more importantly, hope had been reignited. And for Marcus, that made every difficult moment worth it. The courtroom grew quieter than ever as Officer Patricia Hargrove took the stand, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. For someone who had always prided herself on being unshakable, she now looked uneasy, fidgeting with the hem of her uniform jacket. The weight of the evidence against her was undeniable, and everyone could see it in her eyes. Fear, doubt, and a flicker of regret. Hargrove's defense attorney began by asking her to recount the events of the night Marcus was arrested. She spoke in a measured tone, sticking closely to the script they had prepared. "I pulled him over because I believed he was speeding," she said firmly. "When he became argumentative and uncooperative, I had no choice but to take action." Her words sounded rehearsed, almost robotic, but Danielle Carter wasn't about to let her off so easily. During cross-examination, Danielle stepped forward, her presence commanding yet calm. "Officer Hargrove," she began, her voice steady, "you claim Marcus was speeding. Can you point to any specific evidence from your body cam footage that supports this accusation?" Hargrove hesitated, glancing at her lawyer before answering vaguely. "It was based on my professional judgment." Danielle pressed further. "Professional judgment, or perhaps assumptions based on stereotypes." The courtroom fell silent, all eyes locked on Hargrove as she squirmed under the spotlight. Danielle then played snippets of the audio recordings again, pausing after each clip to ask pointed questions. "Is this your voice laughing about targeting certain types of drivers? Is this you dismissing complaints of discrimination as drama?" With every question, Hargrove's defenses crumbled bit by bit. At first, she tried to deflect, insisting her comments were misunderstood or taken out of context. But Danielle wasn't satisfied with vague explanations. She presented data showing a disproportionate number of traffic stops involving black drivers conducted by Hargrove compared to her colleagues. "If these aren't examples of racial bias," Danielle asked, raising an eyebrow, "then what are they?" Hargrove's composure shattered completely when Danielle introduced testimony from former colleagues who described similar patterns in her behavior over the years. One officer recounted how she once joked about giving tickets to those people during roll call, while another recalled her making dismissive remarks about diversity training sessions. Each revelation chipped away at Hargrove's credibility, until even her own defense team seemed reluctant to meet her gaze. By the time Danielle finished, Hargrove looked smaller somehow, not just physically but emotionally. Gone was the confident woman who had laughed mockingly at Marcus. In her place sat someone visibly shaken, struggling to hold herself together. When her lawyer attempted to salvage the situation with closing arguments, his words felt hollow, overshadowed by the mountain of evidence stacked against her. For Marcus, watching Hargrove unravel was both satisfying and surreal. He hadn't imagined seeing someone so powerful reduced to vulnerability. Yet there was no joy in witnessing her fall, only relief that the truth was finally exposed. His parents exchanged glances, their faces reflecting a mix of vindication and sorrow. They knew this wasn't just about punishing one person. It was about confronting a system that allowed such behavior to go unchecked for far too long. As the trial moved toward its final stages, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Spectators whispered among themselves, speculating about the verdict. Protesters outside held up signs reading, "Accountability wins," and "No more excuses," their chants echoing through the halls. Inside, the jury deliberated behind closed doors, tasked with deciding not only Hargrove's fate, but also sending a message about justice and fairness. For Marcus, the end was near, but the journey ahead would require courage, resilience, and hope. He glanced at Danielle, who gave him a reassuring nod. Whatever happened next, he knew he had already sparked something bigger than himself, a reckoning long overdue. The day of the trial arrived, and the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Rows of seats filled quickly as supporters of Marcus Johnson packed one side of the room, wearing matching t-shirts emblazoned with "Justice for Marcus." On the other side sat a smaller group of Hargrove's colleagues and family members, their expressions tense but defiant. Reporters jostled for space near the front, notebooks and cameras at the ready to capture every detail of what promised to be a pivotal moment in the case. Marcus walked in alongside his parents and Danielle Carter, who carried a stack of folders thick with evidence. Despite the weight of the situation, Marcus held his head high, determined not to let fear show. He scanned the room briefly, noticing familiar faces from school and church who had come to support him. Their presence gave him strength, reminding him he wasn't alone. As the proceedings began, the judge, a stern-looking woman with sharp eyes, reminded everyone that this was a court of law, not a platform for personal opinions. The prosecution, led by Danielle, opened its case by presenting the viral video of Marcus' arrest. The footage played on a large screen, showing Hargrove's dismissive attitude and mocking laughter after handcuffing him. Gasps rippled through the crowd as viewers saw firsthand how Marcus had been treated, not like a suspect, but like someone already guilty in Hargrove's eyes. Next, Danielle called witnesses to testify. First up was Lisa, the desk clerk who had offered Marcus water during booking. Her voice trembled slightly as she recounted how scared Marcus looked that night and how unusual it was for an officer to act so aggressively toward someone so young and cooperative. Then came neighbors and classmates who spoke about Marcus' character, painting a picture of a kind, hard-working teenager who dreamed of becoming an engineer. Each story added depth to Marcus' humanity, countering any attempt to portray him as anything less than innocent. But the most explosive moment came when Danielle introduced the audio recordings from Hargrove's body cam. The courtroom fell silent as the judge instructed everyone to listen carefully. When Hargrove's voice filled the room, laughing casually about targeting certain types of drivers, the atmosphere shifted. Eyes widened, jaws dropped, and murmurs erupted among spectators. Even the judge raised an eyebrow, pausing before allowing Danielle to continue. Hargrove, seated beside her defense attorney, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Up until now, she had maintained a stoic demeanor, but hearing her own words played back seemed to shake her composure. For the first time, cracks appeared in her confident facade. She glanced around the room, perhaps searching for allies, but found only stares of disbelief or outright hostility. Danielle seized the opportunity, turning to face the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said firmly, "this isn't just about one bad decision or one wrongful arrest. This is about a pattern of behavior rooted in prejudice, a betrayal of the trust we place in those sworn to protect us." Her word hung heavy in the air, resonating deeply with everyone present. When it was time for the defense to respond, Hargrove's lawyer tried to downplay the significance of the recordings, claiming they were taken out of context. He argued that Hargrove's comments reflected frustration with difficult suspects, not racism, but his arguments felt weak compared to the raw emotion and undeniable proof presented by the prosecution. By the end of the day, the courtroom felt charged with tension. Supporters whispered words of encouragement to Marcus as they filed out, while reporters rushed to file their stories. Outside, protesters gathered once again, holding signs and chanting slogans inspired by the revelations inside. For Marcus, the trial was far from over, but he could feel momentum building. The truth was finally coming to light, and justice, though still distant, no longer seemed impossible. As the legal process unfolded, Danielle Carter dove deep into uncovering every piece of evidence that could strengthen Marcus' case. She knew they needed more than just the viral video to prove Hargrove's misconduct. It had to be irrefutable. During the discovery phase, where both sides exchanged information, Danielle requested access to all records related to Officer Hargrove's past interactions with drivers, especially young black individuals. What she found was shocking and would become the turning point in the case. Hidden within hours of body cam footage from previous stops were moments that painted a disturbing picture. In one instance, Hargrove pulled over a college student for allegedly failing to signal a turn. The footage showed her rolling her eyes and muttering, "Always some excuse with these kids," before issuing an overly harsh ticket. In another clip, she laughed dismissively while questioning a black man about his car registration, saying, "You people never seem to have your papers in order." These comments, though subtle, revealed a pattern of bias that Danielle immediately recognized as critical to their argument. But the most damning evidence came from a recording made during a casual conversation between Hargrove and a fellow officer just days before Marcus' arrest. Sitting in the break room, sipping coffee, Hargrove bragged about how easy it was to target certain types of drivers without raising suspicion. "They always cry discrimination when you catch them breaking the rules," she said with a smirk, unaware the camera mounted on the wall was capturing everything. Her tone was light, almost playful, but her words carried a chilling weight. It was clear she viewed her authority not as a responsibility, but as a tool to wield against those she deemed unworthy. Danielle couldn't believe what she was hearing. This wasn't just negligence. It was prejudice masquerading as law enforcement. She knew this audio would resonate deeply in court, exposing Hargrove's true mindset. With trembling hands, Danielle compiled the clips into a timeline, ensuring each piece fit seamlessly into their narrative. She also reached out to experts in racial profiling and policing practices, asking them to review the material and provide testimony. Their analysis confirmed what Danielle already suspected. Hargrove's actions were part of a broader systemic issue, one that needed to be addressed head-on. When Danielle presented the evidence to Marcus and his family, there was silence. Lisa covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face, while James clenched his fists, trying to contain his anger. Marcus, however, looked thoughtful. "This isn't just about me anymore, is it?" he asked softly. Danielle shook her head. "No, Marcus. This is about proving that no one, no matter their badge or title, is above accountability." Word of the newly discovered evidence began leaking to the press, adding fuel to the firestorm surrounding the case. Protesters chanted louder, holding signs that read, "Expose the truth" and "Accountability now." Even some of Hargrove's colleagues started distancing themselves, realizing the extent of the damage her behavior had caused. For the first time, cracks appeared in the wall of solidarity among the police force. Hargrove, meanwhile, remained outwardly confident. When questioned by internal affairs investigators, she denied making any racially charged remarks, insisting the recordings must have been edited or taken out of context. But behind closed doors, doubt crept in. Friends noticed she became quieter, avoiding conversations about the case altogether. Late at night, alone in her apartment, she replayed the events in her mind, wondering how something she saw as harmless banter had spiraled so far out of control. For Marcus, the revelation brought a mix of relief and frustration. Relief because the truth was finally coming to light, and frustration because it shouldn't have taken such blatant evidence to validate his experience. As Danielle prepared to present the recordings in court, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. He realized this wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about shining a light on injustice and demanding change. And for the first time since that fateful night, he allowed himself to feel hopeful. The days following Marcus' arrest were a whirlwind of emotions for him and his family. His parents, Lisa and James Johnson, couldn't believe what had happened to their son, a quiet, hard-working teenager who had never been in trouble before. They sat together at the kitchen table late into the night, poring over legal documents and news articles about the case. The viral video of Marcus sitting in the patrol car replayed endlessly on TV screens and social media feeds, fueling outrage across the community. Protest signs reading "Justice for Marcus" began appearing in yards and windows throughout the neighborhood. Lisa, determined to fight for her son, reached out to Danielle Carter, a well-known civil rights attorney with a reputation for taking on tough cases involving police misconduct. Danielle agreed to meet with the family the very next day. When they sat down in her office, Marcus recounted every detail of that fateful evening. The accusations, the handcuffs, Hargrove's dismissive laughter. Danielle listened intently, her expression growing more serious with each passing moment. She assured the Johnsons that this wasn't just about Marcus. It was about holding those in power accountable and sending a message that no one was above the law. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, tensions continued to rise. Protesters gathered daily, chanting slogans and demanding answers. Some held up enlarged screenshots from the viral video, highlighting Hargrove's smug expression as she mocked Marcus. Others carried signs bearing statistics about racial profiling in law enforcement. Local activists joined forces with national organizations, amplifying the call for justice. Reporters swarmed the scene, capturing interviews with residents who shared stories of similar encounters with police. For many, Marcus' story wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a much larger pattern. Inside the police department, however, attitudes remained divided. While some officers privately expressed concern about Hargrove's behavior, others rallied around her, defending her actions as justified. Hargrove herself appeared unfazed by the growing scrutiny. During roll calls, she joked about the protesters, dismissing them as a bunch of drama seekers. She even told a colleague, "They'll forget about it in a week. These things always blow over." Her confidence bordered on arrogance, but beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. Friends noticed she seemed distracted, snapping at coworkers and avoiding certain conversations altogether. As public pressure mounted, Internal Affairs launched an investigation into Hargrove's conduct during the traffic stop. Investigators reviewed body cam footage, interviewed witnesses, and examined records related to the supposed warrant used to justify Marcus' arrest. Early findings raised red flags. Not only did the warrant not exist, but there was also evidence suggesting Hargrove had falsified details in her report. This revelation shocked even seasoned detectives within the department, further tarnishing Hargrove's credibility. For Marcus, life felt surreal. On one hand, he was grateful for the support pouring in from strangers who believed in his innocence. On the other hand, he struggled to focus on schoolwork or enjoy time with friends, knowing his name was now tied to controversy. Every knock at the door made him flinch, wondering if it was another reporter or protester. Despite the chaos, he found strength in his family's unwavering love and Danielle's reassurance that they were building a strong case. By the end of the week, the story had exploded beyond local headlines, drawing attention from national news outlets. Talk shows debated whether systemic racism played a role in incidents like Marcus, while online petitions calling for Hargrove's termination garnered hundreds of thousands of signatures. What started as a routine traffic stop had become a flashpoint for discussions about accountability, fairness, and trust in law enforcement. And though Marcus didn't ask for any of this attention, he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let fear or anger define him. With Danielle by his side and his community rallying behind him, he resolved to see this through, not just for himself, but for everyone watching and waiting for change. As the evening wore on, Marcus sat in the back of Officer Hargrove's patrol car, his mind racing with questions. What had he done wrong? Why was she treating him like a criminal? The handcuffs dug into his wrists, and the cold metal seat beneath him offered no comfort. He tried to stay calm, reminding himself that this was just a misunderstanding, a mistake that would soon be cleared up. But deep down, unease gnawed at him. Something about the way Hargrove had spoken to him felt different. It wasn't just her tone or her accusations. It was something more subtle, something harder to pinpoint. Hargrove returned to her cruiser after securing Marcus in the backseat. She glanced at him through the rearview mirror, her lips curling into a faint smirk. Then, leaning against the open door of the car, she pulled out her radio to report the arrest. Her voice carried an air of satisfaction as she described the situation, casually mentioning how uncooperative Marcus had been despite his polite demeanor throughout the ordeal. To anyone listening, it might have sounded like a routine update, but if someone had been standing close enough, they might have caught the mocking edge in her words. Meanwhile, a small crowd began to gather near the scene. A couple walking their dog stopped when they saw the flashing lights. A teenager on his way home from basketball practice lingered nearby, curious about what was happening. One by one, people paused to watch as Marcus sat silently in the patrol car, looking bewildered and scared. Some whipped out their phones, recording snippets of the interaction. They captured Hargrove laughing quietly to herself as she scribbled notes on her clipboard, seemingly unfazed by the gravity of the moment. Others filmed Marcus' face pressed against the window, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. Later, as Hargrove prepared to drive Marcus to the station, she turned to address him once more. "You know," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "this is what happens when you think you're above the rules. Maybe next time, you'll learn to follow them." Marcus didn't respond. He stared straight ahead, trying not to let her words get under his skin. Still, her laugh echoed in his ears, a sound so casual, so dismissive, that it made his stomach churn. By the time Hargrove drove off, leaving the bystanders behind, videos of the incident were already circulating online. Social media lit up almost instantly. People shared clips of Marcus sitting helplessly in the patrol car while Hargrove appeared smug and unconcerned. Comments poured in from all sides. Some defended the officer, claiming she was just doing her job, while others condemned her behavior as cruel and unnecessary. The phrase "racist cop" started trending locally, sparking heated debates across forums and news outlets. For Marcus, the hours spent at the police station felt endless. He was fingerprinted, photographed, and questioned repeatedly about the supposed speeding violation. Each time he explained that he hadn't broken any laws, his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Officers moved around him briskly, avoiding eye contact as though he were invisible. The only person who showed him any kindness was a young desk clerk named Lisa, who slipped him a cup of water and whispered, "Hang in there. This will get sorted out." Back outside, the viral footage of the arrest continued to spread like wildfire. By morning, it had reached thousands of viewers, igniting outrage in the community. Protesters began organizing rallies, demanding answers and accountability. Meanwhile, Hargrove remained oblivious to the storm brewing around her. Back at the precinct, she joked with her colleagues about the backlash, brushing off criticism as overreaction. "People always cry racism these days," she said with a shrug, unaware that her own words, and worse, her actions, would soon come back to haunt her. What neither Hargrove nor Marcus realized at the time was that this single night would set off a chain reaction neither could have anticipated. For Marcus, it marked the beginning of a fight for justice. For Hargrove, it signaled the unraveling of a career built on authority and prejudice. In a quiet suburban town where nothing much ever happened, Officer Patricia Hargrove was a familiar face. Known for her sharp tongue and strict approach to enforcing the law, she had earned a reputation as someone who didn't tolerate nonsense. To some residents, she was a symbol of authority. To others, she was intimidating. But no one could deny that she always got the job done. Until one evening when everything changed. It all started on an ordinary Friday night. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the streets. 17-year-old Marcus Johnson, a bright high school senior with dreams of becoming an engineer, was driving home after finishing his shift at the local grocery store. His car radio played softly in the background as he navigated the empty roads, eager to get back to his family. He didn't know it yet, but this drive would alter his life forever. Officer Hargrove was patrolling the area when she noticed Marcus' car approaching. Without hesitation, she flicked on her flashing lights and pulled him over. At first, Marcus thought it might be a misunderstanding. He'd been careful not to speed or break any rules. As he rolled down his window, he saw Hargrove step out of her cruiser, her expression stern and unyielding. She approached his car slowly, her flashlight scanning the interior before landing on Marcus' face. "License and registration," she demanded curtly, barely glancing at him. Marcus complied immediately, handing over the requested documents while trying to stay calm. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" he asked politely, hoping to clear things up quickly. Hargrove ignored his question and began scrutinizing his license. Then came the accusation. "You were speeding back there," she said firmly, pointing toward the road behind them. Marcus frowned, confused. "I don't think so, ma'am. I've been going the speed limit the whole way." Instead of responding directly, Hargrove leaned closer, her tone growing colder. "You sure about that? Or are you just forgetting?" Something about her words felt off to Marcus, but he stayed composed, repeating that he hadn't broken any laws. That's when things took a turn. Hargrove suddenly raised her voice, accusing Marcus of lying and insisting he must have been speeding. Her demeanor shifted from professional to hostile in seconds. Unbeknownst to either of them, Hargrove's body camera captured every moment, including comments she muttered under her breath. Words like "typical" and "always making excuses" slipped out, though Marcus couldn't hear them clearly. To him, it felt like he was being treated unfairly, but he didn't want to escalate the situation further. Unfortunately, Hargrove wasn't done. She called for backup, claiming Marcus had an outstanding warrant, a claim that would later prove false. When additional officers arrived, they watched silently as Hargrove handcuffed Marcus and placed him in the back of her patrol car. As she slammed the door shut, she let out a short laugh, shaking her head dismissively. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible, but it carried a weight that lingered long after the arrest. For Marcus, sitting alone in the cold metal cage of the police car, the world felt surreal. He replayed the events in his mind, struggling to understand what had gone wrong. Why had such a routine stop spiraled into chaos? Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a story that would captivate his community, expose hidden truths, and challenge the very foundations of justice.